Have you ever wondered if your neighbor could build something so obnoxious, so purely out of malice, that the law would actually step in? This isn't just about an ugly paint job or overgrown hedges. We're talking about a structure specifically designed to annoy you, to block your sunlight, to ruin your view, or to simply make your life miserable. This exact scenario played out in a landmark U.S. legal case that eventually reached the Supreme Court, all over a fence. The core question was, can a structure built entirely for spite be declared illegal? This isn't just a historical curiosity. The precedent set by this case impacts every homeowner in America today, defining the limits of property rights and neighborly conduct. But getting to that resolution took years, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and incredible personal stress. And the initial structure itself was nothing short of a monument to pettiness. Before we dive into the facts of this specific case, let's understand the legal concept at play: a nuisance. In U.S. law, a nuisance is generally defined as an activity or condition that interferes with the use and enjoyment of property. This can be private, affecting an individual, or public, affecting a community. Think loud noises, foul odors, or even dangerous conditions. However, a key distinction arises when the interference is not just annoying, but deliberately malicious. The legal system generally allows homeowners broad discretion over their property. You can paint your house pink, put up a giant gnome, or even build a 20-foot shed, provided it meets zoning codes. But what if the sole purpose of your construction is to harm your neighbor, with no legitimate benefit to yourself? This is where the concept of a spite fence comes in, and it's a very specific and challenging legal hurdle to overcome. The courts had to grapple with balancing property rights against a subjective assessment of intent, a notoriously difficult task. And this particular fence was a masterclass in subjective annoyance. Our story begins with the case of Fontainebleau Hotel Corporation v. 4525, Inc., often referred to as the Eden Rock case, though the spite fence element comes from a related legal principle. However, the most famous and directly relevant case for spite fences is Parker versus Barnard, and more prominently, Sundowner Incorporated v. King. In Sundowner, the dispute was between two motels in Phoenix, Arizona. Sundowner Incorporated owned a two-story motel, and their neighbors, the Kings, owned an adjacent single-story motel. When Sundowner added a second story, it blocked the Kings' sunlight and view. In retaliation, the Kings constructed a massive, 12-foot high fence along the property line, directly in front of Sundowner's second-story windows. This wasn't a standard privacy fence. It was clearly designed to obstruct, annoy, and diminish the value of Sundowner's property. The fence served no practical purpose for the Kings' property. It didn't improve security, privacy, or aesthetics for them. Its only function was pure spite. But how could a court prove that intent? Sundowner Incorporated sued the Kings, arguing that the fence constituted a private nuisance. The trial court was faced with a significant challenge: proving intent. The Kings, naturally, claimed the fence served legitimate purposes, such as increased privacy or security. However, Sundowner's legal team presented compelling evidence to show otherwise. They introduced testimony that the Kings had openly stated their intention to build a fence that would block Sundowner's views and spite them for their expansion. They also highlighted the fence's unusual height and placement, which offered no real benefit to the Kings' own motel operations. Critically, the cost of the fence itself was substantial, estimated at over $10,000 in 1970s dollars, which would be well over $70,000 today. This wasn't a casual project. It was a deliberate and costly act of aggression. The stakes were high, as the fence was demonstrably harming Sundowner's business by making their rooms less desirable. But the initial ruling wasn't a clear victory. The trial court sided with Sundowner, ruling that the fence was indeed a private nuisance because it served no useful or beneficial purpose and was built solely to annoy the neighbor. The court ordered the Kings to remove the upper portion of the fence, reducing its height significantly. This was a crucial victory for Sundowner, but the kings quickly appealed. Their argument on appeal was powerful. Shouldn't a property owner be free to build what they want on their own land, regardless of their motives? This is a fundamental principle of property law, often referred to as the absolute rights doctrine. They argued that if a structure complies with zoning and building codes, the owner's subjective intent shouldn't matter. This legal challenge was significant because it forced the appellate court to weigh fundamental property rights against the concept of malicious intent. The outcome would set a precedent for how far a property owner's rights extend, especially when those rights are exercised to harm others. And the appellate court's decision was even more definitive. The Arizona Court of Appeals upheld the trial court's decision, solidifying the legal principle that a structure built solely for the purpose of annoying a neighbor, without any benefit to the builder, can be deemed a nuisance. This decision was a significant departure from older common law, which often held that property owners had almost absolute rights over their land, even if their actions were motivated by malice. The court specifically cited the ancient lights doctrine, though not directly applicable in most U.S. states for light. The principle of not maliciously blocking a neighbor's enjoyment was relevant, and the evolving understanding of property law. They reasoned that while property owners have extensive rights, those rights are not absolute and cannot be used to inflict gratuitous harm. The court recognized that allowing such spiteful construction would lead to an absurd outcome where neighbors could endlessly harass each other with expensive, useless structures. But the kings weren't ready to give up, setting the stage for the highest court's involvement. The kings, still unwilling to concede, appealed their case to the Arizona Supreme Court. This was their last chance to overturn the lower court rulings and reassert what they believed were their absolute property rights. The Arizona Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, affirmed the appellate court's ruling. This was a landmark moment. The court explicitly adopted what is known as the spite fence doctrine. They held that if a fence or structure serves no useful or beneficial purpose and is erected solely to annoy a neighbor, it can be enjoined as a private nuisance. The court emphasized that the malice of the builder was the determining factor. This was a critical distinction. If the fence had any legitimate purpose, even a minor one, like providing some privacy or security, it would likely have been allowed. But here, the evidence of pure malice was overwhelming. This decision by the Arizona Supreme Court set a strong precedent, influencing property law across the entire United States. But what does this mean for you, the homeowner? Today, most U.S. states have adopted some form of the spite fence doctrine, either through common law precedent like Sundowner versus King, or through specific statutes. For example, California has a specific statute, Civil Code Section 841.4, that defines a spite fence as one exceeding 10 feet in height, erected or maintained with malicious intent to annoy a neighbor and without a useful purpose. If a fence meets these criteria, a court can order its removal or modification. Other states, like New York, rely more on case law. The key takeaway is that while you have significant rights over your property, those rights are not absolute when your actions are purely malicious and cause demonstrable harm to a neighbor, especially without any legitimate benefit to yourself. This doctrine prevents a homeowner from weaponizing their property rights to engage in petty, costly warfare. But identifying a true spite fence isn't always straightforward. What if there's a mix of motives? A common myth is that any ugly or poorly designed fence can be considered a spite fence if it annoys you. This is absolutely false. The spite fence doctrine is very specific and narrow. The key element is the malicious intent of the builder, coupled with the absence of any useful purpose for the structure. If your neighbor builds a fence that you simply find aesthetically unpleasing or that blocks a view you enjoyed, but it serves a legitimate purpose for them, such as providing privacy, containing pets, or marking a boundary, then it is almost certainly not a spite fence in the legal sense. You cannot sue your neighbor just because you don't like their taste or because their legitimate construction inconveniences you. The legal bar for proving malicious intent and lack of purpose is very high. requiring strong evidence, often in the form of direct testimony or admissions. It's not enough to simply feel spite. You have to prove it in court. And what happens if you try to build one? Let's consider the financial mistake the Kings made. Beyond the initial cost of building the 12-foot fence, roughly $70,000 in today's money, they then incurred significant legal fees fighting Sundowner, incorporated through 3 levels of the court system. A conservative estimate for legal fees for a multi-year, multi-level civil case like this, especially reaching the state Supreme Court, could easily exceed $500,000 for each side, possibly reaching over $1 million when adjusted for inflation and the complexity of the arguments. So, the King's decision to build a spite fence and then to vigorously defend it likely cost them well over $1.5 million in total, including the fence construction and all legal expenses. All this despite a neighbor, only to lose every appeal and be forced to remove the offending portion of the fence anyway. This illustrates the enormous financial risk of acting out of pure malice rather than seeking constructive solutions. It's a stark warning that sometimes winning the battle costs far more than any perceived victory is worth. So, what steps should you take if you find yourself in a similar situation? If you suspect your neighbor has built a spite fence, or you're experiencing any significant neighbor dispute, here are concrete steps to take. First, attempt polite, direct communication. Often, misunderstandings can be resolved amicably. Second, if direct communication fails, consider mediation. A neutral third party can often help facilitate a resolution without involving lawyers. Many communities offer free or low-cost mediation services. Third, consult local zoning and building codes. Is the fence in violation of any height restrictions or setback requirements? If so, contact your local planning or code enforcement department. Fourth, gather evidence. Document everything: photographs, dates, times, and any conversations. If you believe there's malicious intent, keep a detailed log. Finally, if all else fails, consult with a qualified real estate attorney. They can assess your case, explain your legal options, and guide you through the process, potentially including sending a demand letter or initiating a lawsuit. Early legal advice can save you significant time and money down the road and help you understand if you truly have a spite fence claim. The core legal lesson from cases like Sundowner versus King is that property rights, while robust, are not absolute. They are balanced against the rights of others and the broader principle that one cannot use their property to maliciously harm a neighbor without any legitimate benefit to themselves. This principle prevents a race to the bottom in neighborly relations, where petty disputes could escalate into endless, costly, and objectively useless construction. It ensures that while you have autonomy over your land, that autonomy has limits when exercised with purely malicious intent. The law aims to prevent homeowners from engaging in expensive, vindictive acts that serve no purpose other than to inflict misery, recognizing that such actions diminish the overall quality of life and property values for everyone involved. It's a reminder that good fences may make good neighbors, but spiteful ones can lead to costly and drawn-out legal battles. The Sundowner versus King case stands as a powerful testament to the fact that even seemingly minor neighbor disputes can have profound legal implications and reach the highest courts. It highlights the importance of understanding the boundaries of your property rights and the severe consequences of acting solely out of malice. The law provides remedies for genuine grievances, but it also discourages using your property as a weapon. Respect, communication, and a clear understanding of legal precedent are your best tools in any neighborly conflict. If you found this deep dive into U.S. legal history fascinating, please consider subscribing for more true legal cases and courtroom stories told simply.